When we begin exploring the subconscious mind, the first thing we must do is untangle a very common misunderstanding. The assumption that the conscious and subconscious mind operate as one unified system. They do not. They coexist, yes, sometimes cooperating, sometimes conflicting, but they are fundamentally different in nature, function, and influence. The conscious mind is the narrator of your life, the part of you that talks, plans, analyzes, reflects, and imagines. It is the surface-level thinker, the part that says, I should do this or I shouldn't do that, believing it is in control simply because it speaks the loudest. But volume is not power. The subconscious mind, though silent, holds the real authority. Most of what you call you, your tendencies, desires, reactions, habits, impulses, does not arise from conscious choice. It emerges from a deeper place, a place you rarely witness directly. The subconscious does not analyze. It does not question. It simply stores, repeats, and protects. It is a vast archive of emotional impressions, learned responses, and internalized beliefs that run automatically beneath awareness. And while the conscious mind can process maybe 40 bits of information per second, the subconscious absorbs and interprets millions. So when the two minds disagree, the subconscious wins every time. This is why people often feel a disconnect between intention and behavior. You can consciously desire discipline, growth, change, or success, yet find yourself repeating the same unhelpful patterns you promised to break. You may tell yourself you'll wake up early, exercise, stay calm, or speak confidently, yet your actions betray your intentions. It's not because you lack intelligence or willpower, it's because your conscious mind sets the goal, but your subconscious ultimately executes the action. And your subconscious only repeats what it already knows. It moves toward the familiar, even when the familiar is unhealthy, unhelpful, or limiting. Philosophers have long recognized this divide. Ancient thinkers understood that human beings do not act purely from reason. They act from a deeper conditioning beneath reason. Modern psychology simply gave structure and language to what philosophers intuitively knew. That human behavior is not driven by what we say we want, but by what we subconsciously believe to be safe, ordinary, and expected. Conscious mind deals with ideals. The subconscious deals with patterns. And those patterns, once established, become the invisible architecture of your life. To understand the difference between these two minds is to understand the difference between decision and destiny. A decision is conscious, temporary, and often fragile. Destiny, at least the psychological form of it, is the accumulation of subconscious programming. If you want to shift the direction of your life, you cannot rely solely on conscious decisions. You must access, question, and eventually reshape the deeper patterns that dictate your behavior. So the real work begins not with the question, what do I want consciously, but with the far more important question, what has my subconscious learned to expect from me and from life? Until you confront that difference, change remains an idea instead of a possibility. And the moment you finally recognize that the subconscious, not the conscious, has been steering the course of your life, you gain the power to reclaim the wheel. If we want to understand why the subconscious mind holds such extraordinary influence, we must go back to the earliest years of human development, those first 7 years of life when the mind is wide open, unguarded, and deeply impressionable. During this period, the brain functions almost entirely in slower wave states, similar to what we experience in hypnosis or deep meditation. A child at that age does not have the cognitive tools to analyze, question, or reject information. They simply absorb. They watch, they listen, they feel, and everything they absorb becomes part of their internal blueprint. It becomes the foundation upon which the subconscious constructs its understanding of the world. This is why childhood shapes us far more profoundly than we often acknowledge. A child does not hear their parents say, "You're difficult," and think, "Ah, that's just an opinion." The child internalizes it as truth. A child does not see conflict in the home and think, "They're stressed, this isn't my fault." The child absorbs the emotional tone of the room as a reflection of their own worth or safety. In those early years, the subconscious mind is gathering data about how life works, what love feels like, how trust operates, whether the world is safe or unpredictable, whether affection is consistent or conditional, whether mistakes are opportunities or threats. These impressions do not simply pass through the mind, they take root. What develops from these early impressions is not just a set of memories, but a worldview. If a child learns that validation must be earned, they grow into an adult who constantly seeks approval. If a child learns that expressing emotion leads to punishment or withdrawal, they become adults who silence themselves. If a child grows up surrounded by encouragement and stability, they carry that sense of inner security into adulthood. The subconscious does not care whether what it absorbs is correct or healthy. It only cares that it is repeated. And repetition in the early years is everything. Philosophically, this raises an important understanding about human nature. We are not born with our beliefs, we inherit them. We do not consciously choose our emotional habits, they are shaped for us long before we can question them. Much of what we call personality is, in truth, early programming. This is not a weakness. It is simply the way the human mind learns to survive. A child must internalize quickly in order to adapt. But the consequence is that many adults walk through life guided by emotional rules they never agreed to, reacting to old echoes rather than present reality. Yet within this truth lies a powerful opportunity. If the subconscious mind was shaped through exposure, repetition, and emotional experience, then it can also be reshaped through those same mechanisms. You cannot rewrite your childhood, but you can rewrite the meanings your subconscious assigned to it. Awareness begins the process, but deliberate emotional practice completes it. The patterns formed in childhood may explain your starting point, but they do not dictate your finishing point. And the moment you recognize that your earliest programming is not your destiny, but simply your beginning, you open the door to a new kind of freedom, the freedom to choose who you become next. If there is one thing that reveals the power of the subconscious more clearly than anything else, it is the way our habits and emotional patterns operate without our conscious permission. We often assume our thoughts are in our control, that our reactions reflect deliberate choices, and that our behaviors emerge from rational decisions. But the truth is far more complex and far more humbling. Much of what we do is driven by invisible scripts, automatic responses stored deep within the subconscious mind. And these responses activate long before the conscious mind has time to analyze or intervene. Consider how quickly you react when someone criticizes you, or when unexpected stress enters your day. You may intellectually know you shouldn't take things personally, yet you feel your chest tighten or your voice rise. You may consciously believe you deserve better relationships, yet you continue choosing partners who echo old wounds. The mismatch between what we consciously desire and what we subconsciously enact is not a flaw. It is simply evidence that the subconscious is older, faster, and far more practiced. The subconscious mind thrives on repetition. It doesn't evaluate whether a habit is good or bad. It doesn't care whether an emotional pattern helps you grow or holds you back. It only cares about familiarity, and anything familiar it perceives as safe. This is why people often remain stuck in cycles that make them miserable. The subconscious is not trying to sabotage you. It is trying to protect you using outdated instructions. When a behavior is repeated enough times, responding with anger, retreating in fear, doubting yourself in moments of opportunity, it becomes encoded as a default pattern. And once encoded, the subconscious deploys it instantly and automatically. You don't choose to overthink, you simply fall into it. You don't choose to procrastinate, you find yourself slipping back into the comfort of delay. The conscious mind may plan, may aspire, may promise to change, but the subconscious executes. Philosophically, this dynamic reveals something profound about human freedom. We often speak as if free will is a simple switch. Either we have it or we don't. But in reality, free will is a gradient. It expands or contracts depending on how much of our internal machinery we actually understand. The less aware we are of our subconscious patterns, the more predictable and limited our choices become. Awareness expands the space in which freedom can operate. To influence behavior, then, we must influence the subconscious. But here is the challenge. The subconscious does not respond to logic, it responds to experience. You cannot think your way out of an automatic behavior. You must retrain it through new emotional and behavioral repetition. This is where discipline, mindfulness, and self-observation become transformative tools. The moment you start noticing your patterns without reacting to them, you interrupt the automatic cycle. You introduce a gap, a pause where conscious choice can enter. And with enough deliberate practice, the subconscious begins to update itself. The truth is, your habits are not a reflection of your character. They are simply reflections of your conditioning. And conditioning can be rewritten. So the task is not to fight your subconscious, but to teach it. Because once you teach it a new pattern, it will defend that pattern as fiercely as it once defended the old one. If we want to understand how the subconscious actually shapes our daily experience, we have to look closely at the quiet, constant dialogue happening beneath our awareness. Every thought you consciously recognize is resting on a much deeper, older layer of interpretation. The subconscious functions like a silent narrator, assigning meaning to events long before the conscious mind has time to reflect. When you meet someone new, your subconscious has already scanned their tone, posture, and expression through the lens of your early emotional memories. When you walk into a room, your subconscious evaluates safety before you consciously decide how you feel. It is not reacting to the present moment, it is reacting to every moment that came before. This is why people can live significantly different internal realities while being in the same external situation. Two individuals may receive identical feedback from a manager. One feels motivated, the other feels attacked. The difference doesn't come from the words spoken. It comes from the subconscious meaning assigned to those words. One person hears an opportunity to improve. The other hears an echo of past criticism. Your subconscious does not simply interpret life. It filters it, colors it, and sometimes distorts it based on what it already believes to be true. This filtration system is not inherently negative. In fact, it is essential for survival. The brain cannot afford to consciously analyze every detail of every moment. It would collapse under the weight of constant evaluation. The subconscious steps in to simplify reality, but in simplifying it, it also reshapes it. And here lies the philosophical tension. The world we think we experience is, in many ways, a world shaped by previous versions of ourselves. What we call perception is often memory in disguise. Because perception feels immediate, we forget it is constructed. We forget that the mind chooses what to highlight, what to ignore, and what to emphasize. We forget that we never see the world as it is. We see the world as our subconscious permits us to see it. And once this becomes clear, a deeper form of responsibility emerges. You realize that learning to control your perception is not a luxury but a necessity. Not because perception changes the world directly, but because it changes the range of actions you believe are possible within it. When you begin to observe your perception rather than simply act through it, something shifts. You start recognizing when your reactions are rooted not in the moment but in old programming. You start noticing where your interpretations are rigid, where your fears are outdated, and where your assumptions come from someone else's voice, not your own. Moment of recognition, you gain leverage. You create space between what your subconscious automatically interprets and what your conscious mind chooses to believe. This is where genuine psychological freedom begins, not in controlling every thought, but in questioning the invisible lens through which the subconscious presents reality. You may not control the immediate perception, but you can influence the framework that shapes it. And with time, that influence becomes transformation. Ultimately, perception determines the boundaries of your life. Expand your perception and you expand your possibilities. One of the most misunderstood aspects of the subconscious mind is the idea that it changes through force. People think if they repeat a positive statement enough times, or if they try hard enough to think differently, the subconscious will simply obey. But the subconscious is not persuaded by pressure or willpower. It responds to something far more subtle and far more powerful: emotional intensity and consistency. What transforms the subconscious is not what you say to it once, but what you emotionally reinforce over time. Think about the memories that shaped you the most. They were not necessarily the logical ones. They were the emotional ones. A moment of fear, a moment of encouragement, a moment of humiliation, a moment of triumph. These experiences left marks not because you analyzed them, but because you felt them. Emotion is the language of the subconscious, and whatever the subconscious feels repeatedly, it adopts as truth. This is why so many people struggle to change their inner patterns. They try to think their way out of habits that were formed emotionally. They try to reason with beliefs that were not created through reason. The subconscious does not respond to arguments, it responds to experiences. And this is where the real work begins. To reprogram the subconscious, you must create new emotional experiences that contradict the old ones, not necessarily dramatic experiences, simple, consistent ones. The subconscious changes the same way it formed, little by little, moment by moment, through experience rather than thought. Deliberate practice becomes essential. When you consistently behave in ways that align with who you want to become, even if those behaviors feel unnatural at first, you begin teaching the subconscious a new truth. The first time you set a boundary, your subconscious may panic because it has learned to fear rejection. But the third time, the fifth time, the 10th time, the subconscious begins to update its model of reality. It begins to understand that expressing your needs does not lead to abandonment. The emotional charge shifts. The pattern changes. Mindfulness plays a critical role in this process as well, because it allows you to observe your old programming without immediately acting it out. When you become aware of a trigger or an emotion and choose not to react automatically, you create a small rupture in the cycle, a tiny interruption that gives the subconscious new information. You show it that the old reaction is no longer necessary. Over time, these small interruptions accumulate and reshape the subconscious landscape. Then there is visualization, which is often misunderstood as mere imagination. But neuroscientifically, visualization is a simulation tool. When you visualize a new behavior or identity with emotional intensity, you give the subconscious a preview, a rehearsal. And like all rehearsals, the subconscious begins to integrate it. The mind cannot always distinguish between a vividly imagined experience and a real one. And this opens the door to profound change. Reprogramming the subconscious is not about convincing yourself of something new. It is about becoming someone new through experience, repetition, and emotional engagement. The subconscious does not respond to who you wish you were. It responds to who you repeatedly practice being. And the moment you commit to practicing a new inner reality, your outer reality begins to shift with it. As we move toward the deeper implications of the subconscious mind, it becomes clear that true self-awareness is not simply about recognizing our habits or understanding our emotional history. It is about confronting a very uncomfortable truth. We are often strangers to ourselves. Most people live their entire lives reacting to impulses, fears, and desires that they believe are conscious choices, when in reality, these forces originate from unconscious patterns, formed long before they could name them. And this raises an important philosophical question. If you do not understand the roots of your behavior, how much of your behavior can truly be called your own? Self-awareness begins with the willingness to observe oneself without judgment. It requires the courage to witness your reactions as they arise, not to justify them or suppress them, but to understand their origin. When you feel anger spike in a mundane conversation, the conscious mind might blame the other person. But a deeper self-awareness asks, what is this anger protecting? What memory does it echo? When you hesitate at a moment of opportunity, your conscious mind may call it caution, but your subconscious may be replaying an old fear of failure or rejection. Awareness pulls these hidden dynamics into the light. The challenge is that the subconscious operates with such speed and subtlety that we rarely catch it in the act. It speaks through impulses, bodily reactions, instincts, and sudden emotional shifts. That is why stillness, mental and emotional, is not a luxury, it is a requirement. Without stillness, the subconscious remains a silent puppeteer. With stillness, you begin to see the strings, but awareness alone is not transformation, it is simply the doorway. Many people become aware of their patterns, yet remain trapped in them because they stop at recognition without moving into responsibility. Responsibility does not mean blaming yourself for the past. It means accepting that the power to rewrite your patterns belongs to no one but you. When you stop outsourcing your emotional life to external circumstances, you begin to reclaim authority over the subconscious forces shaping your decisions. The real turning point occurs when awareness and responsibility merge into deliberate choice. Each time you choose a response that contradicts an old story, each moment you act from clarity rather than conditioning, you weaken the subconscious grip of the past. And this is where identity begins to shift. Identity is not fixed, it is fluid, a construct continually shaped by the conversations you have with yourself. The more conscious those conversations become, the more intentional your identity becomes. In the end, self-awareness is not about becoming someone different. It is about returning to the part of you that existed before the world told you who to be. It is peeling away the layers of inherited beliefs, emotional imprints, and unexamined assumptions until you reach the quiet center of your own mind, the place where genuine choice resides. And if there is one insight worth carrying forward, it is this: you cannot control the entire subconscious, but you can control the part of you that chooses how to engage with it. And that choice, made consistently, becomes the foundation of a life lived with clarity rather than compulsion.